Thanks for watching Coin Collecting Fun, the king of hobbies and the hobby of kings. Please hit that like button and subscribe. It really helps out the channel and is always greatly appreciated. And another wonderful gift from my great buddy Charlie over here that you see on the screen.
Hello.
Yes, indeed. Thank you so much, my friend. So another coin is a gift. And what I'm going to do is just hold this up, and he's going to go ahead and tell you all about it.
Yes, this is a 2007 fantasy coin. It is in the style of a papal coat of arms. Somebody, I don't know who, had the idea of basically creating their own papal name and papal coat of arms, something that like. This is the fictional Pope Joseph. We as the Catholic Church have yet to have a Pope Joseph. We did in a way in that now Pontiff Emeritus Benedict XVI, his original name was Joseph Ratzinger, so we in a way had a Pope Joseph, but not really. This is as said, fantasy coin, but it has this coin has the symbology, Catholic symbology of pomegranates. In Catholic symbology, pomegranates represent eternal life. And then on the back it has what the creator wants to have as a papal coat of arms. We have, of course, the keys of St. Peter and the triple crown tiara that popes have not worn since about 1963, I believe. It has since been retired, but because it's such a piece that's linked to the papacy, every single papal coat of arms has the tiara in their coat of arms, and each pope has a different coat of arms. We, as the Catholic Church, have had over 266 popes. The current one reigning, as everyone knows, is Pope Francis. He is the first Jesuit to be elevated, and he's the first Pope of the Americas. He is from South America, Argentina, I believe, and as a big soccer fan. But this coin is again the idea of somebody wanted to do the idea of what would happen if we created our own papal coat of arms, of a fictional pope. And again, as we said, we've had 266 actual ones, even through what was called the Babylonian captivity, when the popes would literally split, one reigning in Rome, one reigning in Avignon, France. And there was a big kerfuffle that was several centuries, actually, of infighting between who was the real pope, the one in Avignon or the one in Rome. And the pope is chosen from the College of Cardinals. They go into conclave in the Sistine Chapel. It is closed doors. The Sistine Chapel is actually muted to microphones, so that the only way that the world knows whether they have elected a new pope or not is through a smokestack. The ballots are burned in one way. It creates black smoke, means they have yet to decide. If the ballots are burned another way and white smoke is produced, then they have chosen their pope. The cardinals choose among their own who is elevated next, and by the time the men usually get to be a cardinal, they're in their 70s and 80s and the like, so basically they've spent their entire lives within the church. Of course, in the last few years, we've actually seen two current, well, not current, but once reigning popes actually elevated to canonization and sainthood. Pope John the 23rd, who actually started the Vatican II Council. Unfortunately, he passed away from stomach cancer before he could see it completed, but he was the one that actually got the wheels moving and basically dragged the Catholic Church out of the Middle Ages and dispensed with a lot of the, would say superficial trappings of the church, and basically said, okay, let's pare it down to modern day standards. When a pope is elevated, they actually have 3 sizes of papal garments that you, as the now reigning pope, actually are choosing. Then you choose your regnal name. Pope Francis is the first pope to choose the name Francis, even though he is not from the Franciscan order. He is from the Jesuit order of Saint Ignatius Loyola, and it really is one of those things that we as Catholics have had popes for over 2,000 years now, from St. Peter on down. Unfortunately, the first about 50 or so or more are just names in the book. We don't know very much about them other than they were church fathers. By the Middle Ages, you have good men and bad men taking the chair of St. Peter. It has been estimated that perhaps 40 popes murdered, usually by other popes. And for a great while there in the Middle Ages, the papal chair was basically up for auction. Whoever had the most money, in many cases, was the Medici family of Florence, who had the most money and basically bought the election. But good or bad, when you are elevated, it is very hard for a pope to be dethroned. He can voluntarily give up the seat, which happened with most recently with Pope Benedict XVI. He voluntarily abdicated the papal throne due to old age. He said, "I cannot do my duties any longer. I abdicate." The last time a pope abdicated was 600 years in the past. So usually when you're pope, you're in there until you die. And some very interesting and very archaic ways they check when the popes get sickly and perhaps on their deathbed, they are hit with a gold hammer, and if they breathe, they have another day. If they do not, then they have to hold another election and choose another pope. There have been, several dozen popes that have been canonized. The first, I think, 35 popes from St. Peter on down were canonized. Again, the most recent was Pope John the 23rd, and of course Pope John Paul II. Pope John Paul II, of course, was the first ever Polish pope, and John the 23rd was also called Good Pope John, and he felt that the Catholic Church needed change, needed reform, and so he created the Second Vatican Council to basically enact those changes. And like I said, unfortunately, he didn't live to see the end of it. And a good many of the popes were good men for their time. Pope Leo the Great, but then there were those that really did not deserve to wear the tiara. It was it was said that a good many of these men were not fit for the office, but as I said, the office was up for sale at one point. Then you even had the Cadaver Synod. A synod is a meeting of churchmen. The Cadaver Synod happened in the 1100s. One pope, Pope Formosus I, died, and the successor, Pope Stephen the, I believe, 4th or 6th, it varies in the ranking, actually dug up Formosus' corpse, dressed it in papal garments, and put it on trial for aspiring to the papacy and other crimes. The corpse was actually given a lawyer, and the lawyer had to actually stoop down behind the Pope, the Pope's corpse, and actually talk as if the corpse was talking. And of course, the corpse lost the case, and the 3 fingers that were used in blessing, you can see that, was actually cut off, and the corpse was stripped of its garments and dragged behind a chariot and thrown into the Tiber. Unfortunately, for the next 40-odd years, you either were a pro-Formosus Pope, pro-Stephen Pope, or basically said, screw those guys, I'm going to do my own thing, and enacted their own viewpoint. A good many of the popes had what we would think today as backward thinking. One of the popes during the time of Copernicus and Galileo said that the rotation of the sun around the Earth, the Earth around the sun, was contrary to Holy Scripture. We now know that is false. And there was another pope that, during the time of Benito Mussolini, that thought him a good politician and good man to have in the office. Unfortunately, this man, Pope Pius, is called Hitler's Pope because it was thought that he endorsed Nazism. That is still up for debate. That's one of the reasons why he is only at blessed and has not been canonized yet. But if I could recommend several books to you, Absolute Monarchs is a history of the papacy. Great book, great audio book. And also Potpourri, spelled Popepurri by John Dolson. It basically is a book of Catholic trivia covering such things as the creation of the fish fillet sandwich due because of meatless Fridays during Lent. Pre-Vatican II, you had meatless Fridays, and many big cities and like Chicago had large Catholic populations. They would every Friday abstain from meat and have other fish venues to have lunch or dinner at, and they were losing. The church was losing income. So the way that it was thought of is that this young executive went to founder Ray Kroc and said, well, why don't we have a fish sandwich of some sort to offset meatless Fridays? And Kroc was dead set against it. He said, I don't care if the Pope himself comes to Cincinnati. You can have a burger like everybody else. I'm not stinking up my restaurant with any of your damned old fish. And he wanted to have his own creation, the hula burger. It was a hamburger with a slice of pineapple, be the end-all to be-all meat product of the time, but it bombed, so he, in a limited capacity, gave the fish fillet sandwich a try, and not only did it go over like gangbusters, it still exists, and you can still get it off the menu as of today, and you have the Catholic Church to thank for it. Even coffee. Coffee was discovered in an Arabian monastery in the 1100s. An Arabian monk saw the goats that they kept after munching on a wild coffee coffee bean plant, prancing on their hind legs. He tried some, he liked it, and suddenly a new medicine was born. Drinking coffee just for the pure enjoyment of it didn't come until centuries later, and that didn't come without a fight. Here you have a drink that was at one time thought to brew, no pun intended, rebellious thoughts and thoughts of overthrowing the government. And where coffee was sold, it was thought of as seminaries of sedition. And finally, the then reigning Pope at the time, Pope Clement, and we've had a lot of Pope Clements, tried this Clement at this time tried a cup of coffee and liked it so much he baptized it, and he said that we shall not have coffee be the slave and prisoner of Satan. We shall make coffee our own. Thank God. And a lot of things like that are in this book, and to the idea of why does the Pope wear a pointy hat? It usually is originally is because the popes, being oldish men, had a hat on their head to keep down wind and rain and the like. There was a time where they wore it sideways, a bit cockeyed. Thank God that didn't catch on. But you have these men who are not only leaders of the Catholic Church, but they are actual monarchs. During the 19th century, this was the twilight of the Papal States, but the Papal States actually existed close to almost 1,000 years. Not only at this time, not only did the Pope have dominion over Vatican City, as he still does, but he had dominion over basically almost all the Italian peninsula and boot. And suddenly the city-states said, wait a minute, we don't want to be ruled by a political leader who's also a religious leader. That's not our way, and that's wrong somehow. So they erupted in revolt, and by the 1870s they were basically hot on at the gates and wanted to put an end to it. And the Pope actually, at this time, Pope Pius the Ninth, put a call out to all able-bodied Catholic men from any country that they lived in to come to the aid of Rome. And thus the Pontifical Zouaves, or Papal Zouaves, were born. And they fought a 10-year running battle trying to stave off the various city-states from taking over Rome. Unfortunately, it failed, and the cities basically declared their independence. And then suddenly the Pope was, in his own words, a prisoner of the Vatican. And the diplomatic relations to Vatican City were not restored until the 1960s. It is its own country. You can think of a city being a country. Literally, you cross into its borders, you have to have a passport to get in and get out. And there are people that actually live in Vatican City. But the Pope does not have a standing army. He has to borrow the Swiss Guard. And you have the popes that are given to all kinds of interesting behavior, like Pope John Paul. Saint Pope John Paul was an avid skier. And you would have other popes that had other hobbies, stamp collecting, and the like. And you would have the ideas of these men are ordinary just like you, but they not only are rulers of their own nation, tiny though it may be. It is the smallest nation to exist, the Pope is not only the vicar of Christ, but as it says in the fantasy coin here, Pontiff Maximus, one of the very many names the Pope has, and he has several. And Latin is still used as the turn of phrase in Vatican City. All correspondence is translated from Latin or into Latin, and even when new words become part of the national and international lexicon, they have to be translated into Latin. So if you can think of it, there is literally a Latinized version of Gumball Machine, of all things. Yes, the popes wear white because Pius X was a Dominican friar before he was pope, and Pius would not give up the habit of his order. Before him, the popes wore red and velvet and very ornate stitching. But from then on, the popes wore white, and the little hat that the pope wears is not called a yarmulke; it's called a zapato. And there is you have the alb, which is the white undergarment. You have the chasuble, which is the ornate outer garment. There's a name for each one of the vestments that the Pope wears. And with the introduction of the reforms of Vatican II, a lot of the things that made the Catholic Church unique and mysterious was done away with. The communion rail that you see in older churches has been done away with. The tabernacle where the host is kept was actually moved, kept stationary, but the altar was actually moved forward so that the Pope would be presenting behind it instead of in front of it, and he would face the congregation and not with his back to them, which had always happened. But these men, good or bad, have been at the chair of St. Peter for over 2,000 years. And again, the man that now occupies it, Pope Francis, is one of the best. He is actually a survivor of a major operation. He actually caught, I believe, pneumonia very bad when he was a younger man and had to have one of his lungs taken out. So he's operating on one lung. For a man who operates on one lung, he is very articulate, very erudite, and can empathize with those who have lost their own internal organs to disease, and this makes him very relatable and approachable. Unlike some other popes that have been at the chair, that they say, well, we need to remain remote, and we need to be an example. But he has basically embraced people. The first thing he did when he was elevated was he turned to his fellow cardinals. Basically, he's been elevated. He is their boss now. But the first thing he did was he turned to his fellow cardinals and he said, "Pray for me." And if that does not speak to the humility of the man, I don't know what does. He has basically pared away any ostentation. He has done away with the red shoes the popes used to wear. He has done away with a lot of the gold and ornateness. He wears ordinary sandals. When he was all the way up to when he was a cardinal, he would drive his own car, cook his own food, go to the market to pick up his food, take public transportation to to his diocese. This is not new. Pope John Paul would also press the flesh and be in among. But in 1981, an assassin shot at him, and he took one in the lung and nearly died. And not only did he, after recovering, go to the prison and forgive the man who shot him, but they took the remnants of the bullet that nearly killed him and melted the fragments down and actually embedded them in the crown of Our Lady of Fatima. This was the feast day of Our Lady of Fatima, and Pope John Paul, to his dying day, said, "Our Lady, save me then."